Hello, my name is Rachel Lyons, and I was a Jesuit volunteer from 2009 to 2010 in Syracuse, New York. I heard about JVC from one of my coworkers. I was a campus ministry intern at my university after I graduated, and one of my coworkers, Carla, had been a Jesuit volunteer herself. So she told me a bit about the program and the values of community, simple living, spirituality, and social justice. And I felt like it was just a great holistic way to continue learning about my faith and do justice and live with other people who wanted to do that too. So after talking with her, I applied to JVC and was accepted. So made my way to Syracuse, New York in 2009. I lived in community there with 6 other folks, so there were 7 of us in our house. And then my placement where I worked was the Center for Community Alternatives, or CCA is what we called it. And CCA is an organization that works with folks who are returning from prison, usually on parole or probation, and I worked as a career resource assistant. So our Career Resources Center helped folks apply to jobs, figure out maybe what skills they had or needed to get in order to get a job. Maybe they needed to go back to school or go to a training or job development group. So I worked with different job opportunities for folks and helped our members try and gain employment after coming out of prison. My time in JVC was extremely formative for who I am, particularly as someone who is from a smaller town in South Dakota. There isn't a lot of diversity or even really discussion on justice issues. They're not very present where I'm from. So going to Syracuse and also being immersed in a community house where people are working in after-school programs or at a soup kitchen or with folks who may have developmental disabilities, I was really exposed to a lot of different justice issues and a lot of good conversations and formation around how we can help work as people of faith for justice. In particular, at my placement, I learned a lot about the criminal justice system and how broken it is, how racist it is, how really violent and hurtful it can be for people who have to go through it. And for me, working with folks coming out of that system and again trying to find jobs, trying to make a life again, and seeing the intense struggles of their lives was incredibly humbling. And there were moments where I thought, yes, I can help you with this job application. You can get a job, you can get housing and out of your shelter, it can work. And there were times that it did work, a few times. But there were a lot of times where it didn't. A lot of times where folks went back to prison, where folks lost their housing, where folks still felt almost like they were kind of in prison even though they were outside of it. And one particular person I always kind of come back to is Gregory, who I worked with for almost my entire JV year and accompanied him through living in and out of shelters, finally getting an apartment, finally getting a job at a laundromat not too far from our Jesuit volunteer house. But he said to me once when he was in the midst of his really bad struggle, he said, I'd rather be back inside. This is too hard out here. So for me, it was, again, incredibly humbling and a sense of, wow, this is not just, one person who's experiencing this. There are a ton of people coming out of prison who are experiencing this kind of injustice. So it's a larger systemic piece of our society, and I want to help change that. So JVC opened my eyes to a lot of those pieces of systemic injustice and of how we, as a community of Jesuit volunteers, were doing pieces and parts of the puzzle, but that we couldn't do it alone. We had to do it together. So I learned a lot about us as well as myself, just judgments I passed on people, whether it was folks at CCA that I worked with or my own roommates, judging them at orientation, thinking, ooh, I don't think we're going to be friends, or thinking that their quirks were annoying. But then at the end of the year, realizing that their quirks were very endearing and that I had put them in a box or thought of them as a stereotype. And once I got to know them and hear their story, it was something very different. So I think for me, my experience of JVC taught me a lot about persistence, not only in my work with folks coming out of prison and trying to find jobs day after day after day, but also a sense of persistence and really getting to know someone's story, to keep trying, to keep learning different facets of people, and to be persistent in pursuing relationships, kind of across the board, whether that was with my community mates, with God in my own personal prayer during that year, and with the folks at CCA. After JVC, there's always the question of what you shall do next. And my experience had really informed me and brought me to a place where I wanted to continue learning about these 4 values and be part of the JVC family. So I joined the Jesuit Volunteer Corps staff in Baltimore for 3 years following my JV year. After a lot of prayer and discernment, I felt like that was where I was called to do some formation. I helped out with planning the retreats for all the volunteers on the East Coast, and I also then supported each volunteer throughout the year, walking with them alongside kind of their struggles in community and in their placement, doing some education work, and then also doing our screening and placement process for volunteers. So it was really just a diving into JVC in all its facets, and a really great process to give back to a program that had given so much to me. And during that year of JVC, as I mentioned, racism had been something I had really been struck by and confused by and hurt by and just felt guilty about and wanted to dive more into. And in my time in Baltimore, was able to go to a workshop, a 3-day workshop on anti-racism. And that weekend really helped solidify my call to not just be thinking about race or thinking about ways to address racism, but actually be engaged in it, to realize the power that I had to do something about it and start hard conversations and learn more, and kind of stand up for different actions and movements in the city of Baltimore that were trying to break down the systems that perpetuate racism. So for me, that 3 years in Baltimore is a really formative time for me, again, for me to learn about my own sense of power and the sense of power of, or who is in power in a lot of our systems in our country, and how is that, again, hurting a lot of folks and people of color and communities of color in our country, in Baltimore specifically, but then across our country. Also in Baltimore, something that helped bolster that, because thinking about systemic racism is overwhelming and I can be bogged down by it, I think finding a community of faith was something that was really important, particularly coming out of JVC and coming out of living in intentional community. In Baltimore, I was able to find Catholic Worker House, Viva House, and a nonviolent resistance community, Jonah House. And both of those houses were wonderful places where I could celebrate Mass on Sunday, where I could go for a meal, where I could help out in their food pantry and just kind of really find spiritual companions. And I think my time at JVC helped me see how important community is, and to not do this work alone. So that was also a piece of power that I learned, that I can only do so much by myself, but in a group of people and in a movement, there's so much more power. Also, I think at the end of that 3 years, as I transitioned away from my job at JVC, I really relied on the power of God, and felt a big struggle of wanting to switch my job, but not sure if I should leave Baltimore, and ultimately kind of surrendering to say, hey God, I'm listening, help leave me here. And unexpected things happen when you do that, so I ended up moving to Chicago, which is where I live now. And I got into graduate school at Loyola University. And there happened to be this wonderful program for a master's in social justice and community development. So that was where I felt drawn, and so came here to Chicago to do the program at Loyola. It was a 2-year program and learned a ton about different ideas of what justice is, theology and spirituality around justice issues, and how we draw strength from our tradition and Catholic social teaching to do activism, to do justice. Learned a lot about community organizing and how to get churches and congregations involved in politics and wanting to stand up to elected officials and share as people of faith, what are moral issues of our time? How do we push back against things like the criminal justice system where it's broken, or systemic racism, or issues of immigration or environmental justice. So my master's program was great in exploring all those things, and then I got to apply them in my job at Old St. Patrick's Church, which is where I continue to work now, even though I finished grad school. And something kind of full circle from my JV year, right now at Old St. Pat's, we're part of a coalition of churches fighting for restorative justice. And that means it's kind of an alternative to incarceration programs or the traditional criminal justice system, where rather than going to court, particularly nonviolent offenders and youth can go to a restorative justice peace circle. So folks can sit in a circle all together and talk about what happened, what the offense was, and bring healing and restore each person involved and restore the whole community. So it's been a really powerful process to learn about here in Chicago, and also to be an advocate for on the state level, the county level, and on the city level to demand some funding for these restorative justice programs, because they're so vital in preventing violence. So that has been just a huge gift to think back when I'm, at a protest or at an action or calling an elected official. I think back to Gregory in my JV year, and I think about his face and his hopes and his persistence and determination, and I say, okay, like that is how I can keep coming today to work. That's how I can keep bringing my energy and my love and my compassion, because Gregory is still with me, and he deserved my care and attention then, and people here in Chicago deserve it now for restorative justice. And that has been a wonderful touchstone and kind of person I keep on my heart doing this work. It's also been a great time doing my master's program to live in community. I was on a scholarship that allowed me to live with other folks in my master's program. So again, those humbling aspects of living with people you don't know, telling your story again, and beginning to form relationships and connections while talking about these larger issues, and praying together and cooking together, and just finding those small expressions of God's love in our lives together has been a huge gift, and helped inform my decision to further live in community after graduate school. So recently I've moved into Emmaus House, which is an intentional community on the west side of Chicago in Lawndale. I'm the 6th member of Emmaus House, proud to say it, and we're also a community focused on racial justice for North Lawndale and for those communities of color in Chicago. And again, this just speaks so much to my JV year and my experience there, and those seeds that were planted then for me to now choose to live in community, choose to be an organizer at this church, and to bring kind of education on justice and advocacy efforts to our church members. And really feel a sense of purpose in myself as a leader and as an organizer. That has been a huge piece of finding clarity in who I am, what my gifts are, what my limitations are as well, and trusting in God that this is the purpose for my life right now, and that I can sit in that purpose and feel grateful for that. Overall, I would say that my time in JVC through now has really taught me to be a prophet. And that's a word I don't use lightly. I am by no means perfect, and by no means am I prophetic all the time. But I do think that this sense of prophecy is a way to conduct your life, and is a way I want to conduct my life. And because of the things I've been exposed to and the experiences I've had from JVC till now, I don't want to shy away from being prophet, from speaking up, from standing up, from bringing others with me, to learn about faith, to learn about justice, and to put that into action. And I think all those words I touched on in terms of persistence that I learned in JVC, to keep doing it each day, the dynamics of power that I learned in Baltimore, my own power, but also the power of a movement and of community, and also feeling clarity of my own purpose in the world, and this sense that I can be an organizer, and I can work here in this church, and I can move people, and this is my piece to give back to the world. There are certain things that I dream about doing or would want to do, and those are good dreams, but I think it's also great to feel grounded in a purpose for right now, and that helps me be a better prophet when I know what my reach is, and I know what my limits are, but I also know the kind of spaces around me where I can find depth, where I can be grounded, where I can anchor myself, to then speak truth to power, to be an active person of faith, and to continue to put those 4 values of JVC into action in my life. And it's definitely tiring, it's definitely frustrating at times, and I struggle with it. But I also know that I don't struggle alone, and I know that God is with me, even when I might be feeling kind of doubtful or in distress. I still come back to a space of prayer and a space of meditation to know that Jesus, in his own example, had a lot of struggle, had a lot to deal with in terms of pushback and hate and hurt in the world, and that he saw his purpose as bringing a sense of love, of radical inclusion, and of work on behalf of those who were made poor, vulnerable in his time. And that does give me a sense of hope, to know that same Holy Spirit is running through me, running through my community, running through us in our world. So it has been such a huge gift, and I am very, very grateful for that coworker who told me about JVC and the path that has come from that experience. And I'm excited to see where it will lead me from